Alright guys, in this video I'm going to go over cheap versus expensive coilovers and what the differences actually are between all the different coilovers that you can get, and whether you should pay $500 for a set of coilovers or maybe up to $5,000 or more for a set of coilovers, and what you're really actually getting for that money. So firstly, let's go into the cheap coilovers and the issues that you'll typically face with cheap coilovers, and then I'm going to go over the expensive coilovers and what you actually get for paying more money for a set. So I've got a list here of things I'm going to cover. So firstly, the biggest thing that is actually the difference between them is mainly the dampers themselves. Because with springs, you can get universal springs and just use the universal springs made by Ibach or let's say Swift Springs or whoever, and throw them on basically any coilover kit. So you can buy basically the cheapest coilover kit you can find and throw Swift Springs on it, and it's still gonna not be very good, but you've got decent springs. There can be a difference, like springs can sag, etc., but I wouldn't say that's actually a big differentiator. The biggest thing is actually in the dampers themselves. And so there's a range of things that go along with that and how they're matched to the springs. So the biggest thing you have is low quality damper oil. The damper oil is actually a very important part of the coilover or suspension kit in general, because it basically is what controls how the damper performs, along with a few other things. But the damper oil, if it's a good oil, will resist heat, it'll do the job properly, it'll dampen as it should, etc. It'll last longer without damper fade, things like that. And so if you have a low quality damper oil, it will not only degrade over time, but it won't handle heat either. And so basically any form of performance driving, track use, all that kind of stuff, which is usually the reason why people buy coilovers, they're not going to perform well, and as a result, the damper is not going to do its job and probably blow pretty quickly as well. So the damper oil is a major factor that the companies often cheap out on, because you don't know what oil's in the damper. So they can basically, I guess, get away with putting a low quality damper oil in them, and you're never going to know until it doesn't ride very good and it breaks, basically. So that's the biggest one. Now the next one is generic dampers. So this is another big one, is that because they're so cheap, the companies, first of all, don't have the resources, and second of all, any of the facilities or anything to basically test and R&D their dampers for each specific car. And so what a lot of cheap coilover companies do is they'll just use generic dampers. Now this is not necessarily a bad thing if, I guess, you match the correct damper to the correct car and all the specs are correct. But oftentimes they'll just use the same damper across almost every car and just throw them all in universally, make sure the bottom and top mounts fit, and throw them in. And so the problem you have there is that that damper is obviously not going to perform optimally for most cars that it's on, essentially, if any at all. And so your ride's going to be worse, the handling's going to be worse, it's probably not going to handle whatever specific spring rate goes on that particular car, and then that's going to cause the damper to blow earlier. And so basically from the beginning to the end, you're just going to have issues as a result of that. And that's the other big thing with cheap ones, is they'll just use a generic damper. You're never going to be able to find any dyno graphs for the dampers or anything like that because they haven't been tested. You have no idea. And the other problem as well is, while we're talking about the dampers, they won't necessarily match either. So dampers need to match the car, the spring rates, and each other. So I'm just going to put unmatched dampers. So what that means is, firstly, dampers, because there's obviously differences in quality of each parts and each damper is slightly different, two dampers will perform differently even if they're theoretically the same damper or the same specs. And so if you don't actually dyno test the dampers, you're not actually going to know how closely the two perform. And so what ends up happening is, if you have one damper and another damper and they don't perform the same, but they're on two sides of the car, the left side of your car is going to perform differently to the right side of the car, let alone the fact that you've got front and rear as well. So now all four corners of the car are actually performing differently from each other. And so basically you've got no consistency, no predictability of what's going on. For handling, that's bad. For ride, that's bad. Basically for everything, that's bad. And so that's the problem, is they don't really test the dampers, they just chuck them in, and as a result you have no idea what the hell you're getting or whether any of it works together. Now the next thing is that the dampers need to be able to match the spring rates that they're being paired with, and if they don't, then the damper is not going to be able to handle the springs that are on the coilover kit, and as a result it's going to blow earlier, because the damper's job is actually to control the spring. The spring is what basically takes the movement, and the damper stops it from doing this and just reverberating forever. Because otherwise, if you were just running on springs, you would just be bouncing forever. Whereas the damper is supposed to dampen the spring and control it. And so if it's not matched, it's not going to be able to keep up with the spring properly. And as a result, you're going to get a much worse ride, worse handling, and blown dampers again. And then the third thing is the spring rate and the damper need to match the car they're on, because you've got different weights, different weight distributions, things like that. Again, if the dampers are not matched, you're going to have problems, basically the same problems I just covered. So that's a major issue as well. If they're not correctly selected for the car, for the spring rates and each other, you're going to have problems all around and they're not going to last very long. Now, the next thing is just generally lower quality materials. Basically, that can be in the dampers, so the seals, etc. So the seals, let's say, the oil, as we discussed, even the mounting brackets, the mounts, things like that, they can break. That's not as common, but I've heard of instances where that happens. I've heard of instances of springs breaking, mounts breaking, all kinds of stuff. Seals obviously is a big one that I just mentioned as well. And another one I was going to put here is corrosion resistance. That's another one which kind of goes under low quality. Is that a big problem with coilovers is that the threads start rusting up and then the spring purchase or the adjuster sees, and then you can't make any adjustments, and it basically voids them useless. They're basically like a fixed suspension kit. And so if they don't have proper corrosion resistance, they're just going to rust up the first winter, especially if you live somewhere where it snows and there's salt in the roads and things like that, and your coilovers are now no longer coilovers, or at least no longer adjustable. So that's another big one, goes with the lower quality materials. The next one is that they are not typically tested to the car, and so as a result, let's say I mentioned earlier they need to be matched to the car, but if they're not tested and matched to the car, it's not going to be able to handle as well. You're just never going to know for sure until you put them on, and you're basically the guinea pig to find out whatever the company decided to make for your specific car is actually going to be good or not. So if you care at all about ride or handling, that's obviously going to be a big issue. The other thing is there is usually short or no warranty. I'm just going to put no warranty. With the cheaper you go, the less warranty usually there is. And the other problem you have is even if they claim a warranty on the website, are they actually going to give it to you? Can you even get in contact with the company and send it in and get a replacement? Some do, some don't. It can be hit or miss. Some companies do actually do it, even on the cheaper end. But you just need to be aware of there's experiences of people actually being able to claim the warranty, and do they just deny the claims, or do they actually, fulfill on the warranty and give you a replacement when it inevitably blows? So that's another thing you have to keep in mind. Now, the other thing is also you are basically guaranteed to get a bad ride, which is usually too stiff. So what happens is people think that just because a car is stiffer that it's handling better, but the problem is that's not the case. In fact, you can over stiffen a car and it's actually worse than if you didn't even touch it to begin with. And so most cheap coilover kits just make the ride stiff, and they usually are quite uncomfortable and bouncy for the street. And again, that's because the dampers are not matched to the springs, etc. And also they're too stiff for actual proper handling as well. So they don't do either job properly. So they're basically useless. Now, the other thing is fitment issues. I have heard of fitment issues on cheaper ones, particularly with some brands, where the top mounts don't line up. People had to grind out their strut mounts to make them fit. It interferes with something. Brackets are in the wrong place, etc., etc. This is much more prevalent on cheaper kits than it is on expensive ones. So they might not necessarily bolt in as they should. So you need to keep that one in mind as well. That's a risk you're taking. Another one is you don't know how long they will last. So this kind of goes with the warranty thing. But with the cheaper ones, it's basically a crapshoot as to how long it's going to last. They might last a couple months, they might last a couple of years, but the problem is you don't know, and that's because of the low quality or inconsistent quality of parts, etc. You don't really know what you're getting. I've heard instances of the cheaper coilovers leaking right out of the box as soon as someone had them shipped to their house. The damper oil just leaked all over the box. There's other instances where they've lasted 2 or 3 years. So it really depends, but you don't know, and you have to factor in the risk that you might put them in, spend the time or pay someone to put them in, and now a month later you got to redo it again and pay for a new kit if you can't claim the warranty or there was none. So that is a risk that you're taking when you're buying a cheaper kit as well. And the last one I want to put on here is adjustments do nothing. This is a big one with cheaper adjustable dampers. So of course the height adjustment is going to work, but a lot of companies sell you adjustable dampers and you feel the clicks on the thing, but it doesn't actually change anything inside the damper, and so you're not getting any softer or stiffer, or at best they'll sell you like 30 clicks and it realistically is like 2 or 3. by the time you've actually changed it from end to end. So you're not really getting the adjustment that you think you're getting. So obviously that's another one. That could just be low quality parts. Maybe they're not necessarily trying to scam you, but just the low quality parts just don't work as they should. And so the adjusters do nothing and they just click and make a noise. And so you think you're getting something, but you're not. So that's all of the things that you risk when you buy cheap coilovers. Now, as a contrast, I'm going to give you the benefits of the expensive coilovers and what you actually get, which is basically a direct opposite of this list, but I'll list them out so you know what actually happens. So firstly is high quality damper oil and the gas as well. For example, if you've got monotube and you've got high pressure nitrogen, they're using extra nitrogen, and the damper oil is going to be more tested, more specifically used for performance. A lot of companies design their, like for example, RSR or Tane and pretty much all the other ones use a high quality damper oil designed to withstand heat, designed to do its job properly, and designed to actually last over time so that it doesn't just wear out and blow, and basically you have this issue that we spoke about here. So the high quality damper oil is a big one, and that's one of the big things that you do get with the more expensive coilover kits. Now the second one is that they're actually tuned to the car. The higher up you go in the price bracket, the more you're going to have this. So you can get decent kits that don't maybe necessarily do a lot of tuning to the car, but they've at least done a decent job of pairing the dampers and the springs to the car itself. However, as you go higher up, you're going to get each kit is specifically tuned to the specific car. So KW, for one, are ones that are big on this. They have a whole testing rig that's the same as the Formula One one, where they actually put the car on there and they test it for hours and make sure that everything is responding how they want it, etc. So that's pretty impressive. A lot of other higher end, the much higher end ones do the same thing. And so this is going to result in a better ride and better handling overall for your specific car. So it's not just a generic damper thrown on, but it's actually been tuned for the specific, like we said, weight, the balance, everything else, because each car is quite specific. So you're going to get better outcome there. Now the next one is corrosion resistance. So depending on which kit you get, some of them are better than others, obviously, but as you go up in price, the corrosion resistance gets better. So for instance, KW as well, they have basically designed the coilovers. Even some of them have I believe it was a polymer or a synthetic spring perch that doesn't seize up on the threads during winters in Germany and things like that. So it can really withstand like the harshest winter. And so now, your coilovers will last a much longer time actually being adjustable, because they don't just rust up the first winter and now you can't do anything with them. So that's another benefit you get of the existing ones. Now the next thing is that the dampers are actually tested and matched. So dampers tested and matched. So they are tested on a dyno and then matched to each other. So for example, Fortune Auto actively does this, where they advertise they match their dampers within 5% variance of each other, so that you know for a fact that your dampers are about as close as they can get to each other when they're paired together. And so at least the left and right side of your car are going to be performing the same and not doing their own individual things, which is a big problem with the cheap ones. So most high-end coilover kit companies will test and match their dampers to make sure that you're actually getting a quality pair that's going to do its job. Now the next thing is the springs that match to the dampers as well. So we'll go springs match dampers. So if they have like a 12 kg spring, the damper is going to be valved to actually match a 12 kg spring and be able to handle it, and on your specific car. If you upgrade or change the springs, they're actually going to revalve the dampers for you to match that. Now some companies claim they do this and then don't, and they just replace the springs and leave the damper, and so you have to be careful of that as well. But the higher end ones will actually match the damper to the spring, because that's pretty crucial so that the damper can actually do its job like I spoke about earlier, and actually control the spring as it was designed to do in the first place. Now, the next thing is warranty. So pretty much all decent coilover kits come with a warranty. So for example, Fortune Auto gives a 5-year warranty. BC Racing now gives a 2-year warranty. Some of the other ones give anywhere. The typical range is between 1 to 3 years. 5 years is on the extreme end. From memory, I think KW offered a lifetime warranty, at least on the corrosion. I can't remember if that's still the case, but from memory, that was the case. So basically any decent coilover kit is going to give you some kind of warranty between 1 and 3 or 5 years, let's say. And they will actually honor that warranty and replace your coilovers if something does go wrong. Now, the next thing is you won't have fitment issues. So no fitment issues. Basically, that's just not a thing with high quality ones. they will just typically work as they should, or it's very rare. So let's put it that way. You're going to get a much better ride. So even if your kit has been designed for track use or performance, you're still typically going to get a better ride from the track use version that's a high quality kit than like a cheap coilover that's just been slapped together with whatever parts, because it's still designed for the car and they do still have comfort in mind even if they're full performance. So you're typically going to get a much better ride from these ones here, so it's going to be more comfortable. These will also handle track use, typically speaking. So basically any even half decent coilover kit will handle occasional track use without blowing, whereas the cheap ones, again, very hit or miss, and you're basically asking to shorten the life of the dampers if you use them on the track even once or twice, because they're just not designed to do that. Whereas these ones, they will, even the lower end but decent quality ones, like let's say a Tameflex Z, which is designed for comfort on the street, they will still handle the occasional track day use because they have the damper oil that can handle heat and better quality and things like that. So you can actually occasionally use them there. Now, the other thing is that the adjustments actually work. Unlike the cheap ones, where I was mentioning earlier, where you can click the damper adjuster but nothing happens, the adjustments on the high quality ones will actually do something. And if you take a look at even the more higher end ones, like let's say for instance Fortune Auto or KW or Olin's, they have specific valving that they use, and the valve that they use for the adjusting has been specifically designed to work. They each have their own like special system basically, but they've specifically designed the adjuster to do specific things. And so for example, Fortune Auto has an extremely wide range of adjustment. Olin's has its specific valve which does something specific as well. And so they do actually do adjustments and they do what they claim. So you're going to get that with the high quality kits as well. So these are the main differences between these two. These are obviously going to last longer as well, like much longer. You'll probably get out of a decent coilover kit anywhere from 50 to 100,000 kilometers, depending on how you're using it, out of a high quality kit that's from a known brand, versus, like I said, a cheap one might last you 1,000 Ks, might last you a couple hundred Ks, might last you like 10 or 20. You just don't know, whereas these, they will last a lot longer. You're going to get that warranty as well, typically speaking, and it's usually going to be longer as well. Just going to see if there's anything else I missed, but I believe that's most of it. But that's really the difference. Like, I think most people, when they look at it, they see like a $2,000 or $3,000 price tag for a coilover kit, and they think, well, I can just pay $500 and get the same thing. But just because it looks like the same thing, it's not the same thing at all. It's actually a vast difference between the two. And there's also a vast difference between the cheaper end quality kits and the more expensive track use kits as well. There's a big difference there in terms of performance and what you're getting too. So all the way up the ladder, basically, there's differences. And so you just need to be aware of what you're paying for and what you're getting. There are use cases where a cheaper kit might be fine. Or let's say a lower cost kit on the more quality side. Let's say, for instance, a BC Racing BR series. They're a very popular kit that's on the lower end. That would be considered entry level. But they're a decent kit for someone who just wants a decent kit for the street, for example. And you don't necessarily need to go get a full spec track kit if that's all you need. But you need to be aware of what you're buying and what you're paying for. And there is a point where it just gets so cheap that shortcuts had to be taken to make the kit. And so you need to be aware of these things. So that's basically it for cheap versus expensive coilovers. I hope I've made this clear and answered that question. If you have any more questions or comments about them, just throw them in the comments below and I will answer them. Otherwise, if you are looking to buy coilovers for your car and you want to get a decent set, go to nefariousracing.com. We've got a wide range on there for practically every car. And if you need help selecting the right coilovers for your car, for your particular use case and budget, etc., just shoot us an email through the website and we'll help you select the right coilover kit for your car. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Catch you on the next one.